Hey, good morning, everybody. So, what are we talking about today? World War II. Are there any questions that you had over the readings? All right, is everybody ready to go ahead and go for the quiz? All right. Here we go. All right, so what is the Manhattan Project?
It was a project to create the first atomic bomb.
Okay, it is the project to create the first atomic bomb. And why was it begun? Okay, the U.S. started noticing that German scientists, they had been studying atomics, and they had been studying how nuclear fusion and fission works, and then all of a sudden they're not producing anything. And they said, wait a minute, the only reason they're not producing anything, they checked, they haven't gone to any other focus areas. They're like, this has been classified, the government's working on it, they're building a bomb. So we're like, hey, we need to build a bomb. So I will tell you, this is my favorite topic. This is what my first book was on, the Cuban Missile Crisis. The second book was on the creation of the nuclear bomb. So I will try to be nice and not like spend the entire year talking about the bomb, but this is pretty cool to me. All right. So let's talk about World War II. Who are the key players in World War II? Who are some of the folks? Okay, Germans, and they are led by Hitler. Italy, and they are led by Mussolini and the Japanese, right? All right, so let's walk through why are these guys getting into this conflict? And we will see a trend on some of the concerns. All right, so in 1919, Italy is really frustrated with the Treaty of Versailles. That doesn't make sense, does it? I mean, weren't they on the winning side by the end? So the problem is they were promised, hey, if you come over to the winning side, at the end, we will give you some extra territory. What decisions did Wilson make at the end that make this not happen? He says everybody gets to take, name their own leadership, right? Now, he doesn't enforce that on England or France, but they do enforce this on Italy. And so Italy's like, wait a minute, we were on the winning side, we were supposed to get something, and we don't. So a guy named Mussolini, he starts out as a socialist. He is actually the editor for several socialist papers. And over time, he's like, wait a minute, the socialists didn't support Italy in their fighting in World War I because the socialists believed that it was a capitalist war and they just wanted the capitalist nations to fight with each other and then the socialists could take over. Mussolini is like, you guys need to support this country, you need to support this war, and so he decides to establish the Fascist Party. The Fascist Party, anybody know where the word comes from? Is it a bundle of wheat? And so he basically says we're going to be unified like the bundle of wheat. It also has ties back to groups during the Roman ages who were fighters, who made sure they were kind of guerrillas to fight for Rome and to make sure that the people were represented well. So he says, we are going to be the fascists, we are going to be the regular people who go out and fight because we have the power and authority. And then they create the guys called the black shirts. Now, I know all of you guys are thinking, wow, black shirts. I wonder why they would be called that, right? Any thoughts? They wore black shirts. So they are like groups, in the U.S. that are known for wearing white, or currently a group that's known for wearing black. And they do the same thing. The whole concept of the black shirts is, if you don't agree with what I say, I will come and beat you up. I will come and destroy your business. I will come and harm you in some way. And so what we see are trends of people that create groups to enforce their ideology on others. And they do this through force. So you have the black shirts are this group for the Fascist Party. In 1920, he runs for an election as a fascist. But by this time, the socialists have gained a lot of credibility. People are really frustrated with World War I, and the socialists win. Now, Mussolini's really ticked off about this because he thinks he has the right direction for the government. So now, even though he used to be a socialist, he's like, well, this is wrong. You guys shouldn't have won. So if I don't win through elections, but I have a bunch of guys wearing black shirts that like beating people up, what is the next plan?
Runs for election.
Okay, sorry. The March on Rome. So in 1922, Mussolini and all of these guys in the black shirts march on Rome, and they're going to take over the government through force. Now, there is a king in Italy. If you're the king and you see all these guys coming in and you know that they like beating people up, you know that they are going to probably destroy the capital, what do you think might be a wise thing to do? Okay, you could leave, or you send some people out and you go, hey, how about we make a deal? You know what? Instead of you destroying the capital, I'll make you the prime minister. You get to have some authority. You get to have some say in the government. And hopefully that will convince you not to cause a problem and overthrow the government. So Mussolini says, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. The problem with this is Mussolini likes his ideas more than he likes the government. So he doesn't care if the government is destroyed. So he becomes the prime minister. He forms a government, but in 1925, he sends the black shirts out, or there is another group. Basically, he assassinates some of his political rivals. The other people in the parliament and the legislative organization are like, no, we're not playing this game. And so they boycott. While they boycott, Mussolini gets his guys and he's like, hey, you know what? I should have all power and, I will guide the government. And what do you think they say? They're like, yes. And they actually grab him and they carry him around and treat him like he's a hero. So at this point, he contacts the king and he says, hey, by the way, we don't need you any longer. I'm the leader. So why don't you go sit down somewhere, right? Once he becomes the leader of Italy, what is Mussolini's entire frustration? Why is he angry in the first place? Do you remember?
Because the socialists didn't support Italy.
Okay, because he doesn't feel like the world treated Italy correctly after the war. They should be seen as world leaders. They should be seen as a powerful nation. So he says, the way we're going to fix this is we're going to go invade somebody. I mean, because that makes sense, right? So Italy invades what is now Ethiopia. If you are trying to show that you're a big, strong power, why would you invade Ethiopia? I mean, why wouldn't you invade Germany? Now, if you invaded Germany successfully, I would be impressed, right? Why Ethiopia?
Easy to take over?
Okay. So the thought is it should be easier for them to take it. Now, the other piece is when France and England and all the other powers were taking colonies, Italy attacked Sibyan. I'm trying to remember the name, but it is where Ethiopia is now. And this is the only place in Africa that defeated the European invaders. And so Italy was beat by Ethiopia. And they're like, no, we're not going to let this stand. We're going to go back down there and we're going to defeat them. So they go ahead and they invade. This time they do much better, but it takes a little while for them to fight. All right. What's the other country that's getting all riled up and excited? Germany. All right. So in 1919, 2 years after World War I ends. Sorry, that's not true. In 1919, Hitler joins the German Workers' Party. He's really frustrated because he says that the German leadership were traitors. He was a corporal in the army, in the German army, and he says, we were winning the war. And the traitors, the leadership, surrendered on us, And that's why we won. Now, the reality, Germany was not winning the war. They were not being driven back into Germany. They were holding their own. But the German economy was dying. The German economy was not able to feed their own people. So the leadership said, hey, if Wilson is coming in and he says, look, we're going to try to make everything work, then it's probably better for us and our people to go ahead and surrender. What happens is afterwards, when Wilson agrees to France's decision to make Germany responsible for everything and owe money for everything that was spent during the war. So this is not something that the German leadership was cognizant of or ready for. So when they surrender, all of a sudden the things change, and now you have hyperinflation. You can't get ahead because every time you start to get ahead, these war debts are just sitting there piling up over you, right? You have not only the money you borrowed, but the money that France and England and Russia and everyone else borrowed hanging over your head. What else is going on at this time? The Depression, right? And so the worldwide depression is hitting while you owe billions of dollars. German money was so valueless that you would actually take wheelbarrows full of money to pay for a small debt. Some people just wallpapered their house with money because it was worthless. It was cheaper to use it as paper than it was to actually go out and try to buy paper to wallpaper your house. So they decide in 1920 to change the party's name to the National Socialist German Workers' Party. And you guys recognize that as what? The Nazis. And I will say, this is important to me because now everybody talks about, oh, Nazi this, Nazi that, you're a Nazi, you're a fascist. I think we have to be very cautious and very careful with these terms have actual meanings. They don't just mean, I don't like you. They are groups of people that had specific agendas. So the fascists, the agenda is, I want the nation to show power. I want to be seen as a powerful country, and we are going to take over the country through force and then expand the greatness of our nation outside of the borders. With the Nazis, again, the focus starts out, hey, we're going to be socialists. We're going to make things into an organization where everybody's equal. And then they become like many of the communist nations where everybody's equal, except I'm more equal, right? And by more equal, I get what I want, and then whatever's left over, you get. So we basically start out with the Nazi Party saying, we're going to change Germany. We are going to get back to our rightful foundations that say we're a great nation and we can do cool things. In 1921, Hitler is elected the leader of the Nazi Party. He is a tremendous speaker. He is able to convince people of pretty much what he wants them to think. And this is pretty terrifying if you consider it. I would bring in some videos, but he's speaking in German, and so it's not like you're going to be like, wow, I absolutely agree, because unless you speak German, you're not going to understand what he's saying. But you hear these crowds, and they are just like, yes, yes, this is exactly what we want. In 1923, France and Belgium take over the most prosperous part of Germany, the area where they have the factories, where they have the most ability to create money. So, one, why would France and Belgium do this?
Because Germany owes them money.
Okay, Germany owes them money, and they have been fighting over this space for hundreds of years. Now, the interesting thing is, when they do this, what does this do to Hitler and the Nazis?
Makes them mad.
Yeah, because now they owe all this money and you take the section of the country that is the most prosperous, the most able to help pay off the debts. And so Hitler's like, no, we're not going to let that stand. So he decides that he's going to take over the German government. He is going to go ahead and make sure that the German government moves the direction that he wants it to. What do you think his vision comes from? Is there anyone else that has taken over their country in Europe in the recent history of this? I'll give you a hint. Mussolini. So Mussolini takes control in 1925, but he went in 22 with the march, and the government gave him power. So now in 23, Hitler says, you know what, I'm going to do the same thing. In Germany, all of the political things, a lot of things happen in beer halls, right? So they get some of the political leaders in a beer hall, and they take over the beer hall. They kidnap the leaders, and they say, all right, we are not going to let these guys go until you agree to our demands. Hitler thinks everything is under control, so he leaves the beer hall to go take care of some other things. It's kind of funny, one of the leaders is this very powerful German, used to be a general. And when all this happens, this gentleman basically stands up and says, you're not kidnapping me. If you think you can kill me, but I don't think you're willing to. And he basically just walks out. Meanwhile, the police come in, they arrest everybody. Hitler is arrested. When he is arrested, he tries to get away, but he is not able to. So they put him in jail for a year. And then because he has so many people that support him, they pardon him. So in 1932, Hitler runs for the presidency again. He loses again, but he gets 37% of the vote. So think about that. If someone gets 37% of the vote, and it's not just a two-party system, that guy has a lot of influence, right? So what do you think the government does?
Make him chancellor.
Yes, the president that's elected is like, okay, you know what? How about I'll make you the chancellor, you get a part of the government. And again, the thought process is, I will tie you into the government, I will make you part of the government, so you'll want to keep the government strong and keep your influence. But instead, the Nazis surround the Reichstag and basically say, you're going to vote to give Hitler all these powers, emergency powers, or we won't let you out. And shockingly, the Reichstag is like, yes, let's go ahead. We'll give him all the power he wants. And so now Hitler is basically in charge of Germany for the next 4 years. All right, Spain. What is going on in Spain at this point? After World War I, all of these kingdoms realize that their authority is going downhill, that a lot of the people are wanting to have more democratic governments. They are wanting more representation. So the king says, you know what? How about I'll let you have elections, we will get rid of the monarchy, and we will have a republic. So let's go ahead and use, other models that are out there, and we will let people have authority and responsibility. This time, you have the conservatives and the liberals are both very strong, and they are both not willing to compromise. So basically, the republic is taken over by conservatives and then liberals, and then conservatives and liberals, and both sides keep saying, oh, the other side's going to destroy this nation. So we're going to make sure that we retain control. By 1936, the Liberals are in control, and the general in charge of the army says, you know what? This is a bad decision. They're harming the nation. We will come in and we will take over and we will help support the conservatives. Now, if you know anything about military services, you know the Army and the Navy don't necessarily get along, right? When the Army does this, the Navy rightfully says, wait a minute, the military is not supposed to engage in overthrowing your own government. The military is supposed to protect your government. So they come in on the side of the Liberals. And now you have the Army fighting on one side and the Navy fighting on the other side. The war basically becomes the fascist versus the communist, because as everyone gets more and more frustrated, the power moves to the extremes. Does that make sense? Because everybody's like, oh, the other side is trying to kill us. We need to get more extreme. And so whichever side you're on, you became much more extreme. So in 1936, everybody is really worried. What happened in 1917? Or actually in what, 1914? Okay. Did anybody intend to get into World War I? No. What happens is everybody takes a side. So in 1936, everybody in Europe except for Germany, Italy, and the Soviet Union say, we're not taking a side. We are not going to get into another world war because of Spain. Germany and Italy support the fascist side, and the Soviet Union supports the communist side. Does that make sense? And so now you have outside support that is funding this war, that is supporting this war. And so throughout World War I, you have this civil war in, by 1939, the fascists take over, but they refuse to get involved in World War II. And so you have martial law in the entire frame of World War II. So Spain never actually gets involved in supporting World War II. All right, so what's going on in Asia at this time? In 1931, the Japanese take over Manchuria. They've been given control of Manchuria and Korea, and they go in and they are overseeing the government of Manchuria, but there's a train that is going through Manchuria, and all of a sudden bombers place a bomb on the tracks of this train. It explodes, the train goes off the tracks, and the Japanese are like, see, we can't trust the Manchurians. Does anybody actually know what happens?
The Japanese did it themselves.
The Japanese set the bomb themselves. So the Japanese army wants a reason to take over the government. They set up the bomb, and they make sure it goes off. They make sure that people are harmed. And then they say, all right, now we have to take over. In 1932, some young military officers decide to take over the government of Japan. They try to overthrow the government, but the government forces are stronger than they are, and older people in the military come in and protect the government. What happens, though, is as they are in trial, the younger officers say, the reason we did this is because we have to. The government is not making wise decisions. They are not recognizing the strength of Japan, and we need to make sure that Japan gets the credibility that it should have. And so even though the coup fails and the guys are put on trial and in prison, it increases the influence of these military guys who were fighting to expand the power of Japan. In 1933, Japan withdraws from the League of Nations. Is this important? What is the goal of the League of Nations? Okay, it's to keep peace. And why do you think Japan withdraws from the League of Nations?
Because they want to expand.
Okay, because all of a sudden the League of Nations condemns them for what they're doing in Manchuria and Korea, and they're like, forget it then. If you're not going to let us expand, if you're not going to let us use our military power, then we want nothing to do with you. So by 1936, Japan allies with Nazi Germany. What do Japan and Nazi Germany have in common? Why would they be allies?
Because they both want to take over more stuff.
Okay, they both want to take over stuff. Are they close to each other? No. So Japan says, look, I want to take over the Pacific. Germany says, I want to take over the Atlantic. They figure they're going to fight the rest of the world before they ever see each other. So they're like, yeah, let's make a deal that we will support each other, right? And that way we can go ahead and both of us expand and take over all these other countries. And I do believe they both thought at some point, yeah, they will meet each other. But by that time, they can just break the treaty. It's no big deal. So in 1937, Japan invades not just Manchuria, but they go ahead and invade into China. In 1939, Italy joins Japan and Germany with the Pact of Steel. So now you have the three Axis powers, right, who are all working together. And by 1940, you have everybody together. All right, so let's go back to Europe. In 1935, Hitler starts conscription, starts the draft. Is there any concerns with this? Yes. Drew, do you know what the concerns might be?
If they're going to take over stuff.
Yes. The Treaty of Versailles specifically says that Germany can only have a small army. Why do you think they say Germany can only have a small army?
Because when they had a big army,
They used it. Yeah. They invaded France. They invaded the Russia at the time. And so by the treaty, you can't have a large army. When you start a draft, what does that do?
expands your army.
It expands your army dramatically, right? So all of a sudden, all these guys who didn't even know they wanted to be in the military are being drafted into the military. Now, is this enough legally for France and England and the other countries to basically declare war? Yes, it's a violation of the treaty. What do they choose to do?
Brush it under the rug.
Yeah, they're like, we don't want a war. Everybody just wants to have peace. Let's ignore it. Maybe they'll go away. Now, realistically, why would Germany start a draft unless they were looking for a conflict? Right? They have no money. How are they going to pay these people that they are drafting into the military? So what do they have to do?
Take over stuff.
They have to take over more stuff. If they're going to have this army, they have to use the army. There's no reason to have an army that they are paying loads and loads of money and not doing anything with it. So in 1936, we'll start here. They come back in and they take over this area that was annexed from France and Belgium. Again, is this a reason for France to say, hey everybody, we need to declare war on Germany? Yes. Reasonably, this is an act of war. Germany just came in and took property by force away from a different country, right? So legally, that is a reason you are defending your nation. Do they do that? No. All right. In 1938, anybody ever watch The Sound of Music? What's The Sound of Music? What's the background?
Austria,
Okay. They're in Austria. What is happening in Austria?
the Nazis are taking over.
Yes, the Nazis are taking over. And it's Anschluss. So I roll in and I say, hey, we're all German-speaking peoples here, right? So realistically, why are we two countries? And some of the leaders in Austria go, you know what? You're absolutely right. And if you don't agree, the Germans say, we can do this the fun, easy way, or we can do it the hard way, right? What's the hard way?
An invasion.
Yes, an invasion. And Austria's like, you know what? We're friends. We'll just go ahead and join you. And so what you see in The Sound of Music is a Navy admiral, I believe, who says, I don't want to fight for Germany. I know Germany is getting ready for war. I think everybody in Europe saw this. Everyone in Europe that it was not hiding their head in a hole realizes what's going to happen. And so he runs from Austria because he does not want to be part of a second war. So by this time, everybody should see this coming, right? And what do? Exactly. Nothing. They're like, Maybe if we don't notice, he'll stop, right? Because that always works. All right, so in September of 38, Germany gets together with France and England and Italy and says, hey guys, realistically, all of these German-speaking areas should be the same country. So, if you look at this, we have Austria, we have this entire part of Germany, but I'm really nervous because this German-speaking area belongs to a different country. And look, if we have this area here, it's this huge boundary and it invades our country and it makes us nervous. So what we would like to do is we'll just take this German-speaking part, right? And that's all we want. We'll be done. What do you say if I tell you that? Do you want to go to war with me? No. So what are you going to say?
Sure.
Yeah, they're like, we're not happy with this, but okay, if this is the last thing you do, then we will let you do it. And Hitler's like, absolutely, I will never do anything else. Right? And then the rest of eternity, Hitler never took any other aggressive actions, and everyone lived happily ever after, right? Okay. Obviously not. So, he incorporates the Sudetenland, but then in March of 39, he's like, well, you know, we already have this, so we might as well take this. Now, when he does that, do these people speak German? Not necessarily, no. They're more Slovaks. And so, what's his reasoning for that? I mean, he promised, I just want the German-speaking parts. I just want to protect people that are like me. If you notice, when Russia invaded Ukraine, what did Putin say? What did he say he was trying to accomplish? Is anybody watching the news on that kind of stuff?
Restoring order.
He said that the Russian-speaking peoples of Ukraine were scared because the Nazis were taking over Ukraine, and he needed to protect the Russian-speaking peoples. Does this sound very, very much like what Hitler is saying? It's an excuse that people have used for years. Here, I'm going to throw some people into this country, and then I say, oh, I need to protect them. And then once I have that area, then I can just keep expanding. It's a policy that I can use to keep people off my back for a little bit while I prepare to take more property. Now, once he invades Czechoslovakia, is it pretty clear what's going on? All right. So everyone recognizes what's going on. Everyone recognizes this as a threat. What does the U.S. do? Say it again. Yeah, we're like, we don't want to play. In 1935, we say no arms, ammunition, implements of war to any belligerent nations. We are not going to get pulled back into a war. Now, the bad part of this, when you consider it, what was the first two belligerent nations? Italy and Ethiopia. Now, if we say we are not going to provide any arms, ammunition, or implements of war to any belligerent nations, we just said we are not supporting Ethiopia. Is it Ethiopia's fault that they are now in a conflict? No. So why are we not going to support them? Yeah, because we're like, sorry about you guys, but we're not playing. We don't want to get involved in any way. So what did we just tell Italy and Japan and Germany?
If they go into a war, we won't support them.
If they go into a war, we won't support them, but we won't support the other side either. We won't protect anyone against them, right? And if you are a dictator who is determined that you're going to take over the world, you see that as a positive, right? We say Americans traveling on ships have to travel at their own risk. Why would we say that? Do you remember a ship called the Lusitania? Mm-hmm. All right. What happened on the Lusitania?
The passengers died from German submarines.
All right. German submarines blew up the ship sinks, and Americans die, and America gets really angry over it. So we're like, nope. So what you start seeing is all the things that led us into World War II. We're like, we're not going to play these games again. So in 1936, no loans to any nations at war. Why do we decide that? What happened in World War I?
They loaned money and they didn't get back.
Okay, they loaned money to Germany, they loaned money to the Allies, and yeah, they haven't been paid back, but they say that is what caused us to get into the war, that we loaned all this money out, and so we're not going to do this. By 1937, not only are Americans going to travel at their own risk, they are forbidden on traveling on ships from belligerent countries. U.S. ships can't transport arms to any belligerents. If they want to come and buy stuff from us, they need to bring their own ships. We will sell them stuff and they can take it themselves, but we are not going to put it on U.S. ships. And then finally, the president can bar belligerent ships from U.S. controlled waters. So now, basically we're saying we don't want to sell arms two belligerent countries. We are concerned. We want to be isolated. We want to be left alone. We are not going to go to war. We don't care what everyone else does. Now, the difficult part here, why did people go to war in World War I? Because,
Archduke Ferdinand was.
okay, Archduke Ferdinand is assassinated, and it's all these defensive things. Was there an intent, was there an aggressor that is intent on taking over the world? No. So is that a different structure? Is that a different conflict than World War II? Absolutely. So we are not recognizing the difference between a war that kind of came up by accident, where there's really not a bad party, and a war where you have belligerents who are out there just punching people in the face and saying, I'm going to expand my power, I'm going to expand the area that I control. So in 1937, they also decide, hey, we want to clarify, Spain is part of this. Even if it's a civil war, we are not going to be supportive. In 1937, Roosevelt's like, hey, this is different. This is not World War I. So he goes to the world leaders and he goes, look, we need to quarantine the aggressors. This time, we need to work together to stop the aggressors. What does the U.S. say? Do they have any desire to go to war? No. They're like, we're not playing. We are going to sit here and we are going to be safe, and we don't care what happens in the rest of the world as long as we are sitting here safe. And then in 1939, Roosevelt's able to get the last Neutrality Act passed. It is lifting the arms embargo, but it still goes back to U.S. ships are not going to transport any arms. If you want to buy arms, you better have a good ship, because we will put the stuff on your ship and then it's up to you to get it across the Atlantic. All right. Meanwhile, back in Germany, what happened in World War I for Germany? Everybody is remembering the previous war, right? And you're fighting and you're trying to not make the same mistakes that you made in the first war. So Germany, in World War I, what was their biggest problem? They're fighting in the east and they're fighting in the west, right? They're fighting the Russians and they're fighting the French. So if you're Hitler and you know that you're getting ready for a fight, does it make sense to go over to Russia, or now the Soviet Union, and say, hey, we don't want to fight with you guys? Yeah. So Germany goes over to the Soviet Union and they say, hey, we want to make a deal. We will have a treaty with you for 100 years that we will never fight each other. Now, do the Germans truly not want to fight the Russians for 100 years? No. As soon as they're done with the war with France, what are they going to do?
Turn on the Soviet.
They're going to turn on the Soviet Union. Why are they making this treaty then?
So they're not attacking them from the beginning.
Yes, so they can do it in their time. Now, intriguingly, why would the Soviet Union make a treaty with Germany?
Because they don't want to fight the Germans either.
Okay, so the Soviets see this now and they say, you know what? If we can get the Germans to fight with the British and the French and the Italians and all the other people in Europe, and they don't fight with us, we can take that time to build our military up, and when they're all beat down, we can just roll in and take over, and we will take over all of Europe for communism. So is there any side to this treaty that is good? No. They both are looking for, how do I get ahead? How do I get to make sure I win this war later? But the Soviets are like, you know what? We don't need a 100-year treaty. Let's just do a 10-year treaty. They both agree to sign it. I'm amused because neither side, in my mind, ever expected for this treaty to last 10 years. I think that they believed as soon as they were able to be strong enough that they would invade and they would take over. Now, the other piece that no one knows about is the division of Eastern Europe. So, in this treaty, the eastern half of Poland is given to the Soviet Union. The western half of Poland is given to Germany. Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania is supposed to come over, and I believe at least two of them are coming over into the Soviet side. And so what happens is the two major powers there basically say, we will split up Poland. Poland doesn't exist anymore. And then we will split up the rest of this area. And the two powerful nations will take it over. When England and France see what Germany has done in Czechoslovakia, do you think they finally get it? Yeah. So in March of 39, France and England say, look, Germany, we gave you Austria. We gave you half of Czechoslovakia. We allowed you to do whatever you wanted. You took over the rest of Czechoslovakia, and we didn't do anything. But if you try to take over Poland, then we are going to attack. Does this scare Hitler at all? No. By this time, Hitler has a super strong military. I mean, he's had the draft for years now, right? And he's been training the military, he's been training the Air Force, he's been training the Army, he's been training his Navy. He's ready for war. And so now he's like, okay, whatever. And so he rolls into Poland. When he rolls into the western part of Poland, what happens to the eastern part of Poland? The Soviets roll in and take over. And the Soviets tell the Polish guys, what we're doing is we're protecting your nation. Does that make sense? If you're Polish and you see the Germans coming and you see the Soviets coming, you know, do you think, oh wow, maybe the Soviets are actually protecting us? I think they would like to think that, but I think most of them realized, no, nobody's protecting us. So a group of Poles actually go into England and they set up the Polish government in exile. So as soon as Germany invades Poland, France and England declare war on Germany. Germany is ready. They roll into Denmark and Finland because that protects up in this northern part. And then they roll in. So during the last few years, the French create the Maginot Line. It is a set of underground defenses throughout this border between France and Germany. And they say, this will protect us the next time Germany tries to invade. What they forget is Germany doesn't have to do a direct invasion into France, and they don't. Instead of invading straight into France, they go up through the Netherlands and Belgium and roll in through the north. Sadly, I remember I went over to Germany one time, and while we were in Germany, we were like, hey, we got to go into France and eat at a French cafe because, you know, why not? French food. And we drove on the way to France. We see all these signs and they're like, hey, this is the Maginot Line. The Maginot Line protected France from Germany in the entire war of World War II. Germany never crossed the Maginot Line. And I'm like, wow, that is the most political garbage I have ever seen. So it's really cool to say Germany never crossed the Maginot Line, right? And it is true. But 6 weeks after they invade, Germany takes Paris. Does anyone care if they went through the Maginot Line? No. I mean, if they are controlling your country, it really doesn't matter if they went through your protective line or if they came through something else. They still took the country. So the weird part up here is as the Germans are rolling through, they catch about 400 and probably 450,000 British and French troops up near Dunkirk. And all they have to do is drive into them and they will kill them all or they will capture them. But this will take a huge, huge portion of England's army and France's army. So, has anybody ever seen the movie Dunkirk? Okay, a couple people have. If you have a night where you really don't know what to do and you want to see a really cool, heroic movie, Dunkirk is the story. All these guys are sitting here. The English Navy is trying to come over and see if they can save some of these guys. But every time they send a warship down to pick up these soldiers, the Nazi Air Force comes in and sinks the ship. So these guys are basically dead. There is no hope for them, right? Weirdly, Hitler decides, one of his generals says, you know what? I got a better idea than hitting Dunkirk. Let's roll over into a close area that has more political value. And they leave all these soldiers in Dunkirk and they figure they can come back for them. Meanwhile, in England, they put out a notice to every single person who has a boat. And they're like, if you have a boat that can cross the channel, come over and pick up these soldiers. If you have a boat that can pick up 5 people, bring it. And so hundreds of thousands of British people get their boats and they come over and they pull all these guys and they save them. Why doesn't the German Air Force shoot all these ships down?
They're civilian ships.
Well, they're civilian ships. I think if they were bigger, they would have. But there's like thousands of these little ships, right? And so the German Air Force tries to sink them, but there are just so many. Have you ever stirred up an anthill? All right. Can you kill all the ants? Why? There's just too many. And that's what happens here, is there are too many of these little boats that are going back and forth and back and forth. And they save 340,000 troops off of continental Europe and get them back to England. In my mind, this is one of the things that saves the war for the Allies. Had they been able to capture all of those people, the war might have ended earlier. The other thing that's kind of interesting is that Germany begins air attacks on England. And they start bombing England. And so 2 pieces here change the war. One, the British find out about radar. And they can find out when the Germans are flying so they can set up their air defenses. And 2, when they respond, they accidentally hit a German population area. and this ticks Hitler off, and he's like, okay, you know what? If you're going to hit my populations, I'm going to hit your populations. So instead of hitting military targets, he's like, we're going to go ahead and we're going to bomb London and we're going to bomb your other big cities. The thought process is that everyone will be so scared that we'll just say, hey, we're stopping the war. What happens instead?
Shows kind of what German has planned in other surrounding countries. Are like, oh, okay, this is real.
Yeah. And the British people, instead of being like, oh, we want to quit, they're like, no, you just bombed us. We are going to do everything we can to beat you. So it steals the nerve of the British people, and they start fighting a lot more. Now, Germans take Paris on June 14th. Vichy France joins the Germans, and they actually build Jewish camps in France that are just like the Holocaust camps in Germany. There are people who truly buy into, yes, we are just like the Germans, we will do everything that they need. And so France is pretty much divided into the northern part that is supporting Germany and a southern part that is allowed to keep its freedom. And this part works with Africa and some of the other countries to fight against Germany. They don't have the ability, and I'll admit, there are other people in the north that are the resistance, and they are fighting against Germany. But for the most part, most of the people in France are like, hey, you know, it is what it is. So at this point, the US finally realizes this threat is real. What does Germany control in Europe? Okay, they control France, they control Belgium, they control the Netherlands, they control Norway. They also control Austria and Czechoslovakia and half of Poland, and they're allied with Italy. Is this starting to look really bad? Yeah. There is one country that I didn't discuss. Switzerland. Why does Germany not control Switzerland?
Because they're a neutral country.
Okay. Yeah, everybody was a neutral country though,
Yeah.
right? So I actually asked this question when I started my PhD program. One of the guys that I went to school, he is was, because he's dead now, he was the guy that was like, yes, I am the knowledgeable guy on Nazi Germany. And I said, I don't understand. Why did Germany not invade Switzerland? And he said that before the war, a German came into Switzerland, and at a party, he was talking to one of the key Swiss leaders, and he said, you know, it'd be really interesting if Germany had to go into Switzerland and take over. Wouldn't it be wiser for Switzerland just to give up now? And the Swiss leader turned to him and said, well, you know, it's really interesting. Switzerland is full of mountains. You can't drive a tank into Switzerland. And he said, what I want to see is you bring all of these German soldiers into Switzerland, and you watch, because every hill that you come over, there will be Swiss men with guns shooting at you. How far do you think you're going to make it into Switzerland? And Germany decided, you know what? You're right. And they leave Switzerland alone through the entire war. All right. So let's go back to the US. Every 4 years we have an election, right? Now, since George Washington, how many people or how many terms have presidents served? Two. Because if it's good enough for George Washington, it's good enough for me. This is the first time that this changes. Franklin Roosevelt says, you know what? I'm in charge and I'm going to go ahead and help this situation. And so he says, we're getting ready to go to war. Keep me in power. The Republicans select a guy named Wendell Willkie. Wendell Willkie is actually a Democrat who got so frustrated with Roosevelt that he became a Republican. He's like, I was on the Democratic side, but you have taken too much power, too much authority, and you need to go ahead and back off. Now, realistically, this electoral map is not nearly as bad as the last one, right? But who wins? Roosevelt. So Roosevelt actually gets his third term in office, right? All right. Once he gets into position, he realizes that the Allies are in a heap of trouble. So if we don't protect England, then all of Europe could be lost. And who is the next target? We don't know. Realistically, it's going to be the Soviet Union, but they have a 10-year treaty, so it is likely that Germany could come and attack the US, right? And so he says, look, we're going to build up military forces. We are going to support the Allies, all things short of war, all aid short of war. And so we do the Lend-Lease, where we give them destroyers. Now, I'm amused because when you lend military equipment to a country at war, are you really lending it? Do you guys have little brothers and sisters?
You're not gonna get it back.
Yeah, you're not going to get it back in good condition, right? That's like when your little brother or sister who's 3 or 4 goes, yeah, I want to play with your radio. You say no, unless you're like, well, it's already trashed, right? All right, we'll talk about the Manhattan Project really quickly. The Germans have been studying, lots of guys have been studying how atomic, like if you throw atomic particles against each other, what happens? And you discover, wow, it creates this huge energy. Well, over time, people are like, you know what? You could use this energy for a bomb. And so when the Germans stop producing papers, these are all scientists working at universities. When the Germans stop producing papers, you know there's a problem, because in the US and in anywhere, if you're an academic, it's publish or perish. You write about what you're talking about, or you lose your job. You have to be creating knowledge. And so all of a sudden, the fact that these Germans stop writing papers, everybody in the US goes, wait a minute, not the scientists in the US say, wait a minute, there's something going on. And they look to see, are they studying other things? No, they're not. They just stopped publishing. And they said, this means that the Germans have started using this for military purposes. Now, what is the way to stop a nuclear bomb? There's not one. We don't know of a way to stop a nuclear bomb, right? So what's the way to protect yourself from a nuclear bomb? For you to have a nuclear bomb. And so the scientists try to go to Roosevelt and say, hey, we need to create a nuclear bomb. Roosevelt's not going to listen to some, schmuck scientist. So is there any scientist in the US that has a lot of credibility? Yes. Einstein. And so they go to Einstein, they say, hey, will you sign off on this paper? They explain the situation to him. He signs it, sends it to the president, and Roosevelt's like, oh, yes, this is pretty terrifying. You guys go take some money and see if you can develop our own atomic weapon. Germany now invades the Soviet Union. I think the intent was to take over England and then to turn their attention to the Soviet Union. But once they realize they're not going to take over England quickly, they say, okay, we'll leave England. let's go hit the Soviet Union. We've controlled France, and then we'll come back to England. Now the U.S. starts sending supplies, convoys, into England and the Soviet Union. All right. The only reason I think this is interesting, Churchill and Roosevelt sit down and talk about, all right, the U.S. is going into the war. What do we need to do? And they come up with these common principles, which are very, very similar to the principles that Wilson has. It is signed by all of these people, but at the end of the day, again, it's not worth the paper it's on because the Soviet Union signs it and they don't respond. All right, this is when things get ugly. Japan is invading a lot of areas in Asia, right? The U.S. says, okay, we're not going to help you, so they embargo aircraft parts, aviator fuel, munitions, scrap iron, and anything else that can be used in a military way, right? Why would they do that? Do you want Japan to be taking over all of Europe, of Asia? You already have Germany taking over all of Europe. They're like, no, we're not going to do this. So Japan takes over French Indochina because they say, well, we need the war-making material, rubber and oil and tin. So Roosevelt then freezes all Japanese assets and stops all trade. This is intended to stop Japan from invading anywhere else. But at this point, Japan says, you know what? There's no choice. We're going to continue expanding. The only thing in our way is what country? The U.S. So if the U.S. is the only thing in the way, then they're like, hey, you know what? How about we will wipe out the U.S. Navy in the Pacific, and then while the U.S. doesn't have the capability to go to war against us, we will go ahead and we will take over all the area we want. Once we're done, the U.S. can rebuild their Navy, but we will just have to defend, and they won't be able to take over. So in 1941, the Japanese decide they're going to go ahead and attack the U.S. This was not intended to be a sneak attack. They actually sent over into the U.S. Their embassy, and they said, hey, we want you to go to the White House, and we want you to get a meeting with the president, and we want you to tell him that we are going to declare war. But they said, we want to time it really, really well, where it's like we're declaring war, and all of a sudden the attack happens, so the U.S. doesn't have time to prepare, right? The problem is they didn't translate it as quickly as they expected to, and they wanted to make sure, obviously, that the words were all translated correctly. And long story short, they didn't get it to the president on time. So instead, you have December 7th, 1941. The attack hits. The declaration of war is delayed until after the attack starts. They hit Pearl Harbor. They destroy several battleships. They destroy a lot of things. However, the carriers are out on maneuver, so none of the carriers are hurt. They don't destroy the maintenance facilities, so we're able to just pull the ships back up and fix them, and then we're good. All right, so we are running out of time. I was told we got 30 seconds. So we will finish up World War II this next class period.